The restaurant was too quiet for what was about to happen. Daniel sat across from his wife Christine at a corner table in the kind of upscale bistro where conversations were meant to be civil, where people resolve things over wine and artisanal bread. Christine's mother, Margaret, sat beside her daughter with the posture of someone who had never doubted her place in the world. Daniel could smell the lavender perfume Margaret always wore, the same scent that had filled their home for the past 8 years whenever she visited. He watched her manicured fingers drum once against the white tablecloth before she spoke. "We need to discuss the reality of this marriage," Margaret said, her voice carrying the practiced tone of a corporate negotiator. "Christine deserves better than being tied to a charity case." The word hung in the air like smoke. Daniel didn't flinch. He lifted his water glass, took a slow sip, and set it down with deliberate care. Christine looked away, toward the window where rain had started to streak the glass. She didn't defend him. That told him everything he needed to know. "I've contacted my attorney," Margaret continued, sliding a cream-colored folder across the table. "We're prepared to make this transition as painless as possible for everyone involved." Daniel opened the folder. Divorce papers. Already drafted, already detailed, already assuming his compliance. There was a settlement offer too modest, insulting. An amount that suggested he should be grateful for the scraps. What they didn't know was that Daniel had been paying the mortgage on Margaret's estate in Greenwich for the past 6 years. The 7-figure mortgage that kept her in the lifestyle she displayed so proudly at country club luncheons. The mortgage Christine had begged him to help with when Margaret's investments had collapsed quietly, privately, in a way that never made it to her social circle. He closed the folder and stood. "I'll think about it," he said. Margaret smiled like she'd already won. "Welcome to Nolan Folktales, where real stories reveal the truth about power, betrayal, and the quiet strength it takes to reclaim your dignity." If this story resonates with you, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss an episode. Drop a comment and let us know where you're watching from. This is a story about respect, and your support means everything. Now let's continue. Daniel was 41 years old when he married Christine, and she was 34. He'd been a senior software architect at a telecommunications firm in Boston, the kind of position that didn't come with flash but came with deep, steady income and stock options that vested quietly over time. Christine worked in marketing for a boutique firm her mother had connections with, a job that paid well enough but relied heavily on Margaret's network. From the beginning, Margaret had made it clear that Daniel was acceptable, not ideal. She never said it directly. She said it in the pauses before she introduced him at parties. She said it in the way she'd mentioned Christine's ex-boyfriend, the one who'd gone to Yale and now worked in private equity. She said it in 1,000 small cuts that were too subtle to call out but too consistent to ignore. When Margaret's financial trouble surfaced 3 years into the marriage, Christine had come to him in tears. Her mother was going to lose the house, the beautiful colonial estate with the wraparound porch and the garden that had been featured in a local magazine. Margaret had made poor investments, trusted the wrong advisor, and the mortgage was underwater. The banks were circling. Christine had begged, and Daniel, who loved his wife and wanted to help, had quietly refinanced, restructured, and taken on the payments himself. He never asked for recognition. He never mentioned it at family dinners. It was simply what you did for family. But Margaret never softened. If anything, she became more dismissive, more certain of her own superiority. And Christine, somewhere along the way, had started to see him through her mother's eyes. The rain was heavier when Daniel left the restaurant. He sat in his car for a long time, engine off, watching water blur the windshield. He didn't feel angry yet. He felt something colder. Clarity. He drove to his office, a modest building near the harbor where his company leased the 3rd floor. It was late, past 8, but his business partner and closest friend, Marcus, was still there, hunched over his laptop with a cold coffee beside him. Marcus looked up when Daniel walked in. "You look like hell," Marcus said. Daniel sat down across from him. "Christine's mother just handed me divorce papers." Marcus leaned back. "Margaret finally made her move. She called me a charity case." "Jesus." Marcus ran a hand over his face. "What are you going to do?" Daniel pulled out his phone and opened his banking app. He scrolled to the account linked to Margaret's mortgage, the automatic payments that had been processing for 72 months without interruption. "I'm going to stop being charitable," Daniel said. Marcus looked at the screen, then at Daniel. "You've been paying for her house? For 6 years. Does Christine know you could pull that?" "She's about to." What Margaret didn't know was that Daniel wasn't just a salaried employee anymore. 2 years earlier, he and Marcus had launched a software consulting firm specializing in telecommunications infrastructure. The same infrastructure Daniel had spent 15 years mastering. They'd landed 3 major contracts in the first year. By the second year, they were managing systems for municipal networks across the Northeast. Daniel's shares in the company were worth just over $4 million, and the firm's valuation was climbing. He lived modestly, drove a used sedan, kept his wealth quiet. Christine knew he'd started a business, but she didn't ask questions, and he didn't volunteer details. Margaret certainly didn't know. To her, Daniel would always be the man who'd arrived at her daughter's life without pedigree, without the right last name, without the country club membership that mattered. He'd been useful when she needed him, invisible when she didn't. That was about to change. Daniel scheduled a meeting with his attorney the next morning. A sharp woman named Karen who had handled the business contracts and now listened with the calm focus of someone who'd seen worse. "They want you to accept a settlement that doesn't even cover your contributions to the household," Karen said, reviewing the divorce papers. "And they're assuming you won't fight." "I'm not going to fight," Daniel said. "I'm going to withdraw." He explained the mortgage situation, the payments, the timeline. Karen's expression didn't change, but her pen moved faster across her legal pad. "If you stop those payments, the foreclosure process will begin within 90 days, she said. "Margaret's credit will collapse. The house will go to auction." How long before she realizes what's happening? Banks send notices at 30 days, 60 days. If she's not checking her statements closely, she might not notice until the second notice. Maybe longer. And Christine. She's listed as a co-signer on some of the refinancing documents. She'll be notified too. Daniel nodded slowly. "Do it. Stop the payments." Karen made a note. "There's something else you should know. If this goes to court, your business assets will be part of the divorce proceedings. They'll want a piece of the company. Then we need to make sure it doesn't go to court on their terms," Daniel said. "We need leverage." The first notice arrived at Margaret's house 28 days later. Daniel knew because Christine called him, her voice tight and confused. "Did you stop paying my mother's mortgage?" she asked. He was in his office, standing by the window overlooking the harbor. "I did." "Why would you do that?" "Because your mother handed me divorce papers and called me a charity case," Daniel said evenly. "I'm not obligated to fund her lifestyle while she tries to erase me from your life." There was a long silence. "Daniel, she's going to lose the house." Then maybe she should have thought about that before she decided I wasn't worth basic respect. "This isn't just about her. This affects me too. You sat there and let her call me a charity case, Christine. You didn't say a word. So yes, it affects you too." She hung up. Daniel set the phone down and went back to work. If you're still watching at this point, drop a comment with, "I'm still here." Let's see who's truly following this shocking story. The second notice came at 60 days. This one was more urgent, more specific. Margaret called him directly this time, her voice clipped and furious. "You're trying to destroy me," she said. "I'm stopping a payment I was never required to make," Daniel replied. "If that destroys you, Margaret, maybe you should ask yourself why your financial survival depended on the generosity of a man you openly disrespected. Christine will never forgive you for this. Christine made her choice when she handed me those papers." Margaret's voice shifted, became almost pleading. "We can renegotiate. We can adjust the settlement. Just reinstate the payments." "No. Daniel, please. You called me a charity case. You treated me like I was lucky to be tolerated. You never once acknowledged what I did for you, for your daughter, for your family. And now you want mercy." He could hear her breathing on the other end of the line. "I'll see you in court," she said, and the line went dead. But Daniel wasn't waiting for court. He was building something Margaret couldn't see coming. Karen had advised him to document everything, every payment, every email, every text message where Christine had asked him to help with her mother's finances. He had 8 years of records. Bank statements, payment histories, refinancing agreements that showed his name, his credit, his money keeping Margaret's world intact. And then there was the business. Marcus and Daniel had been approached by a private equity firm interested in acquiring a stake in their company. The offer was substantial, enough to triple Daniel's net worth overnight. But it came with a clause. Any pending legal disputes involving the principals had to be resolved before the deal could close. Margaret's divorce filing was now a threat to an 8-figure transaction. Karen filed a countersuit, not for alimony or assets, but for restitution. Daniel wasn't asking for half of Christine's future earnings. He was asking for repayment of every dollar he'd put into Margaret's mortgage, with interest, documented and verified. The filing was public record. Within 48 hours, Margaret's attorney called for a meeting. They met in a conference room in downtown Boston, all glass and steel and uncomfortable chairs designed to make people settle quickly. Margaret looked older than Daniel remembered, her confidence thin and brittle. Christine sat beside her, pale and silent. Margaret's attorney, a man named Philip with silver hair and an expensive suit, opened the conversation with a tone that suggested this was all a misunderstanding among reasonable people. "Mr. Harrington, we're prepared to offer a revised settlement that acknowledges your contributions to the household," Philip said, sliding a new folder across the table. Daniel didn't open it. "I'm not interested in a settlement." Philip blinked. "I'm sorry. I'm interested in full restitution for the mortgage payments I made on Margaret's behalf, plus interest, plus compensation for the damage this divorce filing has caused to a pending business transaction." Philip looked at Karen, then back at Daniel. "That's over $1.3 million. 1.4 actually," Karen said, tapping her pen against her notepad. "We've included the lost equity value from the delayed acquisition." Margaret leaned forward. "You can't be serious." Daniel met her eyes. "You told me I was a charity case. I'm closing the charity. This will ruin me." "You were already ruined, Margaret. I was just keeping you afloat. You mistook my kindness for weakness, and now you're learning the difference." Christine finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Daniel, please. We can fix this." He looked at her, this woman he'd loved, this woman who'd sat silently while her mother dismantled him. "You had 8 years to fix this, Christine. You chose her every single time. I didn't know it would come to this. You knew exactly what she thought of me. You just didn't care enough to stop it." The meeting ended with no agreement. Philip tried to bluster about taking it to trial, about fighting the restitution claim, but Karen had already filed preliminary motions that would freeze Margaret's remaining assets pending the outcome. The foreclosure on the Greenwich house was now inevitable unless Margaret could come up with $700,000 in the next 30 days. She couldn't. Daniel knew she couldn't. 3 weeks later, the house went to auction. Margaret bought a small condo in Stamford with what was left of her savings. Christine moved in with her. The divorce was finalized quietly, with Christine signing an agreement that acknowledged Daniel's financial contributions and waived any claim to his business assets. She didn't ask for alimony. She didn't fight. She just signed. The private equity deal closed 2 months after that. Daniel's company was now valued at $42 million, and his personal stake had grown to just over $12 million. He stayed in Boston, kept working, kept building. Marcus asked him once if he felt guilty. They were sitting in the office late one night, going over projections for the next quarter. "Guilty about what?" Daniel asked. "Letting Margaret lose everything." Daniel thought about it, really thought about it. "She didn't lose everything because of me," he said finally. "She lost it because she built her life on arrogance and other people's money. I was just one of the people holding her up. When I let go, the structure collapsed. That's not my fault. That's physics." Marcus nodded slowly. "Christine reach out at all?" "No. You miss her." Daniel looked out at the city lights, the harbor dark beyond the buildings. "I miss who I thought she was. But that person was never real. I was in love with a version of her that didn't exist, or maybe existed for a while and then got swallowed by Margaret's expectations. Either way, she's gone. You did the right thing, Marcus said. I know. 6 months later, Daniel was walking through a farmer's market near his apartment when he saw Christine. She was alone, carrying a canvas bag filled with vegetables. Her hair pulled back in a way that made her look younger, softer. She saw him at the same moment. For a second, neither of them moved. Then she walked over. "Hi," she said. "Hi." They stood there in the middle of the market, people moving around them, the smell of fresh bread and coffee in the air. "I wanted to say I'm sorry," Christine said quietly, "for all of it, for not standing up for you, for letting my mother control everything, for being too afraid to choose you." Daniel didn't respond immediately. He watched her, this woman who'd once been his whole world, and felt nothing but a distant sadness. "I appreciate that," he said finally, "but it doesn't change anything." "I know." She looked down at her hands. "I heard about your company, about the sale. I'm happy for you. Thank you. Do you hate me?" Daniel considered the question. "No, I don't hate you. I just don't think about you much anymore. And I think that's probably worse." Christine's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't let them fall. "Yeah, probably is." She turned to leave, then stopped. "For what it's worth, you were never a charity case. You were the best thing that ever happened to me, and I was too stupid to see it until it was too late. Take care of yourself, Christine," Daniel said. She nodded and walked away, disappearing into the crowd. Daniel stood there for a moment, then continued shopping. He bought fresh tomatoes, some basil, a loaf of sourdough. He went home and made dinner for himself, something simple and good. He ate alone and it didn't bother him. That night he got an email from Marcus. Another contract offer. This one from a city in Oregon looking to overhaul their entire telecommunications grid. It was the kind of project that would take 2 years and cement their reputation on the national level. Daniel read through the proposal, made notes, and scheduled a call for the following week. He thought about Margaret sometimes, wondered if she ever regretted the way she treated him, if she ever connected her downfall to that moment in the restaurant when she'd called him a charity case. He doubted it. People like Margaret rarely saw their own role in their destruction. They blamed the world, blamed circumstance, blamed everyone but themselves. And Christine, poor Christine, would spend the rest of her life wondering what would have happened if she'd been brave enough to choose differently. Daniel didn't wonder. He knew exactly what would have happened. They'd have been fine. They'd have been happy. But she hadn't chosen differently, and now they were both living with the consequences. He was just living with them better. The revenge, if you could call it that, hadn't been dramatic. There was no explosive confrontation, no public humiliation, no moment of theatrical justice. It was quieter than that, more surgical. He'd simply stopped subsidizing a woman who despised him, and the natural consequences had followed. Margaret had built her life on a foundation of borrowed money and borrowed respect, and when one of the pillars was removed, the whole thing had come down. Daniel hadn't destroyed her. He'd just stopped saving her. And that, he'd learned, was enough. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is nothing at all. Just stop playing the game. Stop accepting the insults. Stop funding the people who see you as beneath them. Walk away and let gravity do the rest. A year later, Daniel met someone new. Her name was Rachel, and she was a project manager for a construction firm. She was smart, funny, and had no patience for pretension. She'd grown up working class, put herself through college, and had a refreshing contempt for people who measured worth by pedigree. They met at an industry conference, started talking about infrastructure projects, and ended up having dinner. Then another dinner. Then a weekend trip to the coast. She never asked about his ex-wife, and he didn't volunteer. When he finally told her the story, months into their relationship, she listened quietly and then said, "Good for you. Nobody should have to pay for the privilege of being disrespected." That was it. No drama, no judgment, just simple acknowledgement. It was the kind of response Daniel had needed from Christine and never received. Rachel met Marcus and they got along immediately. She came to company events, asked intelligent questions about the business, and treated Daniel like a partner, not a project. When Daniel's company hit $50 million in valuation, Rachel insisted they celebrate properly. They went to a small Italian restaurant in the North End, the kind of place with checkered tablecloths and candles in wine bottles, and she raised her glass. "To walking away from people who don't see your worth," she said. Daniel smiled and clinked his glass against hers. To walking away. If the story moved you, if it made you think about respect and self-worth and the quiet power of walking away, do me a favor. Hit that like button, drop a comment about what you think Daniel should have done differently or if he made the right call, and subscribe to Nolan Folktales for more real stories about real people facing impossible choices. Your support means we can keep bringing you these stories. Thank you for watching, and remember, sometimes the strongest thing you can do is stop holding up people who see you as beneath them. See you in the next one.